It was the summer of 2016. My sister, Emily, had just turned 19. And we were closer than most siblings. Maybe because we grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. We lived in this old house that had been passed down in the family for generations. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough to have that creepy, lived-in feel that old houses get. You know, creaky floorboards, strange drafts, that kind of thing. Nothing too unusual though. At least not at first. Emily had always been a little different. She was quiet, artistic, and had this natural connection with animals that I always thought was a little eerie. Cats and dogs would follow her home, and even wild animals didn't seem afraid of her. She used to joke that she had a witchy side, but none of us took it seriously. Everything started to change in August. Emily had just returned from a camping trip with some friends at a state park. She came back looking off. At first, we all thought she was just tired from the trip. But after a few days, it became clear something wasn't right. She wasn't acting like herself. Her normally bright and happy personality had dimmed. She would stare off into space, barely responding when we talked to her. At night, I could hear her pacing in her room for hours, as if she couldn't sleep. One night, I woke up to the sound of Emily talking to someone. I got out of bed and walked down the hall to her room, thinking she might be on the phone. But when I opened the door, she was sitting on her bed, alone, whispering. Her voice was so low and guttural, like something I'd never heard from her before. It sent a chill down my spine. I asked. She didn't look up. She just kept muttering to herself, her words too quiet and fast for me to make out. I took a step closer and put a hand on her shoulder. She jerked away, her head snapping toward me, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes. They were wrong. They weren't her eyes. They were dark, like her pupils had swallowed all the color. And there was this blank, empty expression on her face. It was like staring into something that wasn't my sister. "Emily, are you okay?" I asked, backing away. Her voice cold and emotionless. "Leave me alone." I did. I didn't know what else to do. I was freaked out, but I figured maybe she was sleep-talking or something. But that night was the first of many, and it only got worse from there. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a stranger to all of us. She barely ate, barely slept, and she started keeping to herself more and more. She would spend hours locked in her room, and when she did come out, she was different, aggressive and angry. She lashed out at Mom, at Dad, even at me. And there was this smell. Her room started to reek of something foul, like rotting meat. No matter how much we cleaned, it wouldn't go away. Then came the voices. At first, it was just Emily talking to herself again. But then we started hearing other voices coming from her room. Deep, raspy voices that didn't belong to her. I would walk past her door and hear multiple people talking. But when I opened it, she'd be alone, sitting in the corner or pacing like an animal trapped in a cage. Once, I heard her laughing this horrible, maniacal laugh that made my blood run cold. By then, my parents were terrified. We all were. We took her to doctors, therapists, anyone who might be able to help. They ran tests, prescribed medication, but nothing worked. Emily was slipping away from us, and it felt like something was taking her place. One night, things came to a head. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., and I woke up to the sound of Emily screaming. Not just screaming, shrieking. It was the most horrible sound I've ever heard. I ran down the hall and burst into her room, my parents right behind me. What we saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Emily was on her bed, her body contorted in a way that didn't seem humanly possible. Her back was arched, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, and her head was thrown back so far it looked like her neck would snap. Her eyes were rolled back into her head, and she was screaming in this voice that didn't sound like hers at all. It was deeper, darker, like there was something else inside her. The room was freezing, so cold that I could see my breath, and the air was thick with that rotten smell again, but worse this time, almost unbearable. My mom started sobbing, begging Emily to stop, but Emily, or whatever had taken over her, just kept shrieking. Then, she started speaking, but it wasn't English. It was some language none of us recognized, something guttural and ancient sounding. Her voice kept shifting, like multiple people were speaking through her at once. And then, she started laughing again, that horrible laugh that wasn't hers. My dad, who had always been a rational man, didn't know what to do. He'd never been religious, but at that moment, he grabbed a Bible from the bookshelf and started reading from it, shaking as he held it up toward Emily. That's when everything went still. Emily's body relaxed, her head slowly lowering back to the pillow, her eyes fluttering shut. For a second, I thought it was over. I thought whatever had happened to her had stopped. But then she opened her eyes, and she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was cold, cruel, like she was mocking us. "You can't save her," she said in a voice that was both hers and not hers at the same time. "She's ours now." Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Emily's body went limp, and she passed out. We didn't know what to do after that. My parents were beside themselves. They tried reaching out to priests, but no one wanted to get involved. They said things like mental illness or stress, but we knew better. We knew this wasn't something that could be explained by science. Eventually, we found a priest, an old man from a few towns over, who agreed to come to the house. He didn't promise anything, but he said he would pray for Emily and see if he could help. The night he arrived was the last night I saw Emily as herself. The priest came with a small vial of holy water and a Bible, just like in the movies. He asked us to stay in the living room while he went to Emily's room. We waited for what felt like hours, listening to the muffled sound of him praying. At first, it was quiet. But then, the noises started again. The screaming, the growling, the laughter. Louder than before. And then there was a crash. The priest came stumbling out of the room, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I can't," he said. "This is beyond me. You need to leave this house. All of you." We left that night, staying with family in another town for a while. We couldn't bring ourselves to go back to the house for weeks. When we finally did, Emily was gone. Her body was there lying in bed, as if she was asleep, but she wasn't Emily anymore. She never spoke again, never opened her eyes. The doctors said it was a coma, but I knew better. Whatever had taken my sister was still inside her, waiting. We moved out of that house soon after, but I still dream about her. I dream about that night, the look in her eyes, and the sound of that laugh. I don't know if Emily is ever coming back, or if she's gone forever. But I do know one thing. Something took her from us, something dark and ancient. And it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. If you have any personal paranormal stories, feel free to send them to my email with clear grammar so I can easily understand. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get notifications for my latest videos. Thanks for watching.